Hey everyone, welcome back to Today in Tech. I'm Julia Beauchamp, and I'm here with Macworld Executive Editor Michael Simon, as well as Computer World Executive Editor Ken Mingus. We are live on Computer World's LinkedIn page, as well as on our YouTube channel, IDG Tech Talk. So if you have any questions or comments while we are discussing it, please do let us know in either the comments or the live chat, and we will be sure to respond while we are actually live. So we're going to talk a little bit today about the NVIDIA and ARM merger, which is almost certainly now not going to go through. Probably almost a year and a half ago now, year and change, NVIDIA announced plans to acquire ARM for $40 billion, obviously a huge deal from SoftBank. When it first came out, a lot of speculation was saying this might not go through because of regulatory hurdles. That seems to be the case. There's a lot of regulatory pressure in both the US and the UK. So I wanted to talk a little bit about sort of what a licensee might be feeling. And we can talk a bit about this article on Computer World that I will link. So Ken, I guess since this article is on Computer World, can you speak to like what the consensus might be around a licensee right now, like Apple, for example?
I think they're probably happy because, actually in the piece you're talking about, Johnny Evans wrote about this, I think it was last week. Apple actually had the chance to buy ARM in 2020 and did not do so, probably for the same reason that NVIDIA shouldn't have tried, because you get all this regulatory concerns about the licensees and the fact that so much of what ARM does is being used by a number of companies, which would have given NVIDIA, some real serious insights maybe into what rival companies are doing.
Exactly.
It's the kind of thing that just gives regulators the skeeves, when they see something like this. And so it is sort of interesting that it's now finally emerging that, what a surprise, this deal may not go through. In terms of the companies that work with ARM, including Apple, I think they're probably happy that this isn't happening.
Yeah, and worth mentioning, so many companies are ARM licensees, and some that are certainly direct competitors, AMD, Qualcomm. So yeah, this certainly, I would imagine that this deal could have muddied the waters a little bit.
Well, it absolutely would have muddied the waters. And I know we're going to get into this in a minute, but when you think about what Apple is doing with Apple Silicon, it's got a lot of proprietary information and processes and God knows what that it doesn't want to share or inadvertently have leaked to rivals or NVIDIA or whoever. And, it's a pretty important time for Apple to kind of keep that stuff separate and private for Apple's sake. And so again, I don't think there's been a lot of reaction publicly from the companies.
True.
I don't think I've heard anybody. Tim Cook did not come out and say, phew,
Yeah, hooray.
But I think it's a very quiet sort of satisfaction that this isn't probably going to happen.
I mean, it's not just Apple.
No.
Qualcomm in all of its mobile processors uses ARM reference designs. Microsoft has a chip in the Surface. I mean, I don't know how. When I remember reading the story, when it arrived, we were like, well, okay, like what? Like Intel is getting NVIDIA is getting itself into a giant headache here because let's say the deal goes through. It's going to be a ton of stipulations because they can't just yank it or raise the price, or I don't know how licensing works with ARM. I don't know what the costs are, or what the deals are, or what the contracts are. But NVIDIA can't just they can't just abandon all of those contracts. These are gigantic companies with a lot of clout. I was surprised that a team of Apple, Microsoft, Qualcomm, Google, and maybe NVIDIA, maybe even Intel, didn't just get together and say, hey, let's all do this together, almost making it like an open source type of thing with, obviously with licensing and payments, just to make sure that it's still available for the industry to use. One person with competing interests can't own a company like that. It just doesn't work.
Right. Certainly without a lot of stipulation.
Yeah. So governments around the world are going to get involved and say, hey, you can't, this is very anti-competition.
Yeah.
To your point, Michael, I mean, basically, if NVIDIA were to do this, again, if the deal had gone through or were to go through, so much of what makes ARM valuable would have had to have been walled off
Yeah, right.
from
Which is like all
NVIDIA,
of it. Yeah.
Mhm.
which it doesn't
So
make
why doesn't
sense.
NVIDIA just license ARM and do whatever it was planning to do with it?
Yeah.
Like I can't imagine, unless maybe the appeal were those licenses and they said, well, we can use that as to bolster our bottom line. Now all those payments come to us. I don't know.
Mhm.
But it did seem strange at the time, and the fact that it's just hasn't gone through and probably won't does not surprise me at all.
Yeah. And just also for some background on this, since this deal is almost certainly not going to go through, Bloomberg reported it earlier this week, I think. It's probable that ARM's going to sort of spin off and IPO, which is like kind of also a concern because they don't know if there's going to be like enough like capital to really support. It's a complicated measure. I'll link the Bloomberg story as well, so you can like learn a little bit more about the specifics. But it's SoftBank I think is pretty eager to get rid of it, and I'm sure that for them it might be a bummer that this isn't going to go through. But let's talk a little bit about what these licensees are doing. And Apple is obviously a great example, but Microsoft also does the Surface, right? Mike, you would know Surface on ARM.
Yeah, there's a what is it, like the
Surface
Q something chip? I don't know. Let me get the name of the chip.
And I think they work with Qualcomm. So there's a lot of licensees that are using their stuff. So can either one of you
it's called the SQ1 processor.
Okay.
It's a Qualcomm Microsoft thing.
Right.
But it's based on optimized for ARM64.
Mm-hmm. So I guess, are either one of you comfortable speaking to like sort of what companies do when they work with ARM? I understand that they are licensing the architecture, and then they can sort of like use that architecture to customize their chips. And that's sort of what, let's say, Apple, for example, did with Apple Silicon, right?
That's pretty much it. They take ARM is sort of the reference, the foundation,
Mm-hmm.
and then depending on what the company what the licensee needs, they take that basic design and then customize it for whether it's a Surface tablet or Apple desktops or laptops, or it depends on what they need, but they can build on that. So that's why, because it's so foundational to what all of these companies are doing, no matter how much they customize it and add to it and maybe evolve it, if you have one company that owns the foundation, everything that's built on top of it depends on that foundation.
Mm-hmm.
That's probably not a great analogy, but that's kind of how I understand it.
Sure. So then let's just dive now into, Apple's doing stuff with ARM. Obviously, that's what Apple Silicon is based on. So what sort of is coming up in the new year on the topic of ARM processors?
New chips.
New chips?
Well, new chips, variations on existing chips. We don't know Apple's cadence just yet because they haven't come out with a second chip. So December 2020 was the M1 in the MacBook Air, in the Mac Mini, and in the 13-inch MacBook Pro. That's been now, so what are we in January? So that's been
February.
14, 15 months. Oh, February, geez. 14, 15 months or so. So obviously they're not on an annual cadence. So maybe we're looking at 18 months, which would put us right around June, which is, WWDC time. So the M2 will be based on the M1, probably still 8 cores, 4 power, 4 efficiency, a little bit faster. We can kind of look at like the iPhone as an example of this.
Mm-hmm.
So the A15 versus the A14 chip, they're essentially the same. We're talking about what, 15%, 20% increase in speed. Yeah,
15% every year.
Nothing mind blowing, but enough where if somebody's waiting for a new machine, you can hold off for a month or so and get the better one. Now the M2, which here's where it gets a little confusing, because the M2 will still be significantly slower than the M1 Pro and the M1 Max, because that's how Apple is kind of differentiating the lines. So we're going to have whole numbers, M1, M2, M3, M4, presumably up until M37. And then in between those, probably also on an 18-ish month cadence, we'll get M1 Pro, M2 Pro, M3 Pro.
Right.
And those will be kind of like souped up versions of the M1. We saw this a little bit with the iPad Pro. So Apple had the A14, A13 chips, A12, whatever one. I don't remember exactly which one the iPad Pro got, but they started to do like A12Z, A12X, which was, they would kind of overclock it a little bit. They would add an extra graphic core, whatever it is, just to make it a little bit faster than the iPhone chip. That's kind of what this is. So the M2, like I said, will be based on the M1. The M2 Pro will be similar to the M1 Pro. Like
Sure.
they're the same but different. So
Yeah.
I'll explain that real quick. The M1 Pro has 4 power cores, 4 efficiency cores. I'm sorry. The M1 has 4 power cores, 4 efficiency cores. The M1 Pro has 8 power cores and 2 efficiency cores. So it's a different architecture, even though it shares the same name and it's based on the same general design, chip design. It's a different chip. It's used for different, like the benchmarking comparatively is quite a bit different.
Michael, I'm just wondering, in talking about, okay, we go from M1 to M2, M1 Pro, M1 Max to M2 Pro, M2 Max. What do we think is going to go in the Mac Pro whenever it arrives? Would they do like an M3 for something?
I don't
like
think
that?
so.
Okay. How are they going to differentiate?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, the M3 doesn't make any sense because like there will be an M3 and it's a consumer level machine.
Right.
I'm sorry, it's a consumer level chip. The Mac Pro is rumored to get and like an M1 Pro chip with a dual die and 2 of them.
It's like a double.
So we go
M1
from 10 cores to 40 cores.
Okay.
Which is, monstrous. Now,
That's insane. Yeah.
Apple could just completely and totally have a new name for that chip because that chip is not going to appear in any other machine.
Right.
Intel does that. They call it the Xeon. That's for their super high-end workstation machines. It's not. So there's the Alder Lake Core i9 chips. That's relatively consumer, some pro, and then they have the super high-end chips. The Xeon processors. Apple could say this is the M1 Pro X or something.
Okay.
Yeah, they could, they did it. We didn't expect them to rename. We didn't expect them to rename the M1 Pro what they did.
Yeah.
So they could just say, this is the Mac Pro processor. It's called the M1 CX937. I don't know. And that would strictly be for that machine. Like it is now. I mean, right now that machine has the Xeon. If you remember, the iMac Pro had them as well. And now there's talk that the iMac Pro, which is also coming out this year allegedly, or the replacement for it, could have a 12-core M1 Max. So, the same processor as the MacBook Pro, but slightly faster maybe, or a different option, an option with 12 cores instead of 10 cores maybe. But it looks like all the consumer-ish Pro machines, the ones that we can afford, will have M1 Pro. The Mac Pro, we still don't know. We still don't know. And Apple they got to sell that in a different way. Because that's not a $2,000 machine. That's a $6,000 machine or maybe less.
Yeah.
But it's a lot.
It was.
Well, see that. I just want to make one quick point, Julia.
Yeah.
Literally, what we're talking about here, the various iterations of the M1, M1 Pro, M1 Max. That's exactly what licensees do with ARM chips. They take it and they iterate in different ways, which just goes back to what we were originally talking about. That's why this deal was such a big deal in the industry had it gone through. Okay, enough
You pretty
of
much
that.
you pretty much took the words right out of my mouth. That's perfect. And what I also was going to say is that I'm glad, Mike, that you sort of went over what the differences are or like might be between these chips, because that's kind of what I am looking at this wondering, and I'm looking at probably like most ARM licensees in this case is like, how are you distinguishing between iterations of your new chips, right? Especially when you already have something like the M1 chip, that it's kind of like how much more powerful and how measurably faster can you really make a chip? So especially for something that's like, allegedly going to have a pretty long life, right? Like I kind of am wondering what more can really be done. Obviously the technology changes and like advances every year, but I don't know. I guess what's like really going to be groundbreaking, if anything, about a new M series chip?
I mean, the M was the groundbreaking.
Right.
Yes.
Okay.
Like we got that already.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't know. What's the next groundbreaking part? I don't know.
But,
Faster, more efficient? I don't know.
I was just going to say, it's not just about speed, especially when you're talking about mobile devices like laptops or tablets or, phones, whatever.
Yeah.
Efficiency, battery life, and also things like heat.
True.
If you can design a chip that is more efficient, produces less heat, and is faster,
right,
then that gives you more room inside whatever device you're developing the chip for to re-architect other subsystems. So you can come up with different, wireless technologies, Face ID cameras, screen technology. It allows you more flexibility to do more with other parts of the system in the device beyond just the chip. So it's not just about speed.
That's a great.
I mean, we saw those benefits immediately with the MacBook Pro. We got 120 hertz refresh. We got a new design. We got obviously faster speeds, more ports, all the things that we wanted for many years. It gives Apple and others the license, no pun intended, to really kind of improve these machines while also making them ridiculously fast and lasting for 17 hours. Intel just came out with its 12th gen Alder Lake processors, and PC World, the kind of sister to Macworld, they tested them and they beat the M1 Max.
Wow.
The top of the line $3,000 MSI laptop did beat the M1 Max in some benchmarks. And we ran an article on Macworld.
Yes, please continue.
We literally wrote that with an asterisk in the headline because, I mean, the power efficiency is ridiculous. Like the thing lasts like 5 hours.
There is no power efficiency.
Right. That's the big thing. And it's $3,000 and it has a 1080p display and there's a million but with that. So what Apple has done with Apple Silicon, like, I don't understand all the licensing stuff. I don't know what they pay ARM. I don't know how much they use of ARM. I don't know anything about that. I'm not a chip expert. What I can say is that what they've done in the last 1 year, all of CES, all of it, AMD, NVIDIA, Intel, it was all about we're as fast or faster than the M1, and Apple's been out for 1 year, and they have 7.6% market share. They are making serious noise.
Yeah, making big waves in the industry. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I want to, just before we wrap up, I do want to touch on this one point that I was thinking of about something that you said just a few minutes ago, Mike. But I think probably what we're talking about the benefit of, like building upon this ARM architecture. I would imagine that it's also just a benefit for an Apple, for example, and maybe eventually for a Microsoft, that they have complete control over that ecosystem. So, I mean, with Apple, you've got the hardware and you've got the software working together, and maybe with a Microsoft, you're going to get your own chip and you're going to have Windows working together. So, I don't know. I'd be curious if Microsoft.
It's not as easy. Apple makes it look easy. It's not, as evidenced by Microsoft failing numerous times to create that ecosystem. Google too. Apple's ecosystem, it gets, it's a punchline, and they call it a walled garden and all that stuff, but it's extremely efficient. It works remarkably well with all of the devices Apple sells, and it encourages purchases of other devices, but you don't necessarily need those other devices, but they're nice to have. Like they do it in a way that no other company has been able to match. And the processor is a big part of that. The integration is a big part of that. The software is a gigantic part of that. All of that. I mean, Steve Jobs used to always say Apple's a software company, even when were making beautiful iPods and everything else. He said we're at our core, we're a software company, and that's where it starts. Microsoft is too. Apple just does it they think about it, they approach it in a different way than every other company out there.
Yeah, I was about to say, I wonder like if Microsoft is going to like further its foray into ARM based chips.
I mean, they're trying.
Yeah.
They've been trying.
I'm sure it makes a ton of sense to do so.
Yeah, but the Surface is nothing. Yeah, people know what they are and they sell them, but not like Macs, not like iPads. I mean, they don't even have a phone. Microsoft never came out with a successful phone.
No, they have the Duo.
That is nuts.
They lost that whole battle when they
I said
screwed up the
successful,
whole phone
Julia.
thing, you know.
It's crazy. It's crazy to me that Microsoft does not have a phone that people want to buy. Nuts.
I just like in relationship to this topic, I am going to link in a live chat, and I'll also make sure it's linked in the description, a video that I did actually probably a year and a half ago now, it looks like, with one of our InfoWorld writers and Serdar Yegilalp, and then also our Windows expert contributing editor for Computer World, Preston Gralla, about Windows on ARM, which I think is actually pretty interesting. So I'll link that if anyone is interested in watching that.
That's another foray that hasn't really taken off.
Yeah,
they've been doing that for how many years? They've been trying to get Windows to run on ARM in a way that it could be mainstream, and it hasn't reached it. It hasn't gotten there.
Yeah.
Just be quick before I forget.
Yes.
We don't know this for sure, but I'm willing to bet lots of the money that I have that Apple is working on a chip that doesn't rely on ARM. They're not going to be blindsided if this was to happen. Yeah. Other companies might be. I'm sure Qualcomm's working on it as well. But the companies that rely on ARM, they're not stupid.
Mm-hmm.
They saw the writing on the wall long before NVIDIA even announced that they were looking to acquire ARM. So I'm quite certain that if that were to happen, there would be a period of time where Apple would have time. It wouldn't just be overnight. They would be ready to say, okay, we're switching, and we wouldn't notice at all. They've been doing this chip game for long enough now where I'm sure they can pivot, and 95% of the design of the chip is probably their own anyway. And I'm sure they're working on several different options that use maybe RISC, but not ARM.
Sure. That's a good point. Great. Well, thank you both so much for calling in and chatting about this. I think this was a pretty interesting topic. And even though it's not like the biggest surprise in the world that this acquisition is not going to go through, it's, at least interesting to speculate about what would have happened if it had. And I mean, ARM's not going away, but it'll be interesting to see like how it sort of evolves and if eventually an Apple, for example, a Qualcomm, for example, an AMD is going to completely ditch an ARM architecture. That'd be pretty interesting. So thank you both so much. And thank you all for watching this episode of Today in Tech. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you are watching on LinkedIn, you can head over to our YouTube channel, IDG Tech Talk. You can like the video over there, subscribe to our channel, and hit the bell icon so you're notified every single time we post a new video. If you have any questions, comments, statements, in general, theories that you want to let me know, please leave it in the comments on YouTube especially, and I will do my very best to get back to you. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you next time.